Let me start by saying I, 27F, never thought my family could betray me like this. I've always been close to my parents and my brother, Mark, 25M. Growing up, we weren't rich, but my parents worked hard to make sure we had everything we needed. They always emphasized the importance of family, and for the most part, we had a good relationship. That's why what happened feels like such a stab in the back. For the past 3 years, I've been engaged to my fiancé, David, 29M. We've been saving every penny for our wedding. We're not flashy people, but we wanted a nice ceremony with our closest friends and family. David and I both work full-time jobs, but between student loans and rent, saving hasn't been easy. My parents, knowing how hard we've been working, offered to help. Last year, they set up a joint family account for big milestones, weddings, emergencies, maybe even future grandkids. The idea was that we could all contribute to the fund, and when one of us needed it for something important, we'd have a safety net. I thought it was a wonderful idea. I've been putting part of my paycheck into that account every month, and my parents even added a significant amount to help with the wedding. But a month ago, I logged in to check the balance and felt my stomach drop. Nearly all the money, $25,000, was gone. I panicked and called my mom immediately. She seemed confused at first, but after a long pause, she admitted that Mark had taken the money. Mark is the golden child of the family. He's always been the one who could do no wrong, even when he made questionable decisions. He's been jumping between jobs for years, never really settling on a career path. Recently, he got into the habit of bragging about how he wanted to see the world and live life while he's young. I just didn't realize he meant doing that on my dime. When I confronted my parents about why they let this happen, they immediately got defensive. My dad said, "Mark's been feeling really down lately, and we thought a trip might help him reset." My mom chimed in, "He said he'd pay it back eventually. Don't you think you can wait a little longer for the wedding?" I was furious. How could they let him take money that wasn't just mine, but money meant for a once-in-a-lifetime event? They kept insisting that Mark needed it more right now and that I was being selfish for making it a big deal. That night, I called Mark. He was unapologetic. He didn't even try to deny it. "I figured you'd understand," he said casually, as if he hadn't just stolen thousands of dollars from me. "You've always been the responsible one. You'll figure something out." I was speechless. Mark then had the audacity to brag about his trip, 2 weeks in Bali, a luxury cruise, and several stops in Europe. He even sent pictures to our family group chat of him sipping cocktails on a private beach. My blood was boiling. After the call, I told my parents I wanted Mark to pay back the money immediately or I'd press charges. They acted like I'd just declared war. "Honey, it's just money," my mom said. "We'll help you save up again." "But this was my wedding fund?" I shot back. My dad sighed and said, "We understand, but do you really want to ruin your relationship with your brother over this? Family is more important than a wedding." The next few weeks were a nightmare. Every time I tried to talk to my parents about holding Mark accountable, they shut me down. "You don't know what he's going through," my mom kept saying. "He's still figuring things out. You're better at handling stress than he is." My aunts and uncles even got involved. Apparently, Mark had been going around telling everyone I was overreacting, calling me a bridezilla who cared more about a party than family unity. My cousin texted me, saying, "It's just a wedding. You can still get married without all the fancy stuff." Even David, my fiancé, started feeling the pressure. "I know this sucks, but maybe it's not worth the fight," he said one night. "We could have a smaller wedding and move on." But this wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about the principle. How could I trust my family if they thought it was okay to take what wasn't theirs? Mark eventually agreed to meet with me to talk things out. I hoped he'd finally take responsibility, but instead, he showed up with a smug grin and a coffee in hand, like this was a casual chat. "Look, I'll pay you back," he said. "I just need some time. You know how it is." "How much time?" I asked. "A few years, maybe," he shrugged. "A few years?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He launched into a long-winded speech about how travel was a form of self-discovery and how he couldn't put a price on broadening his horizons. When I asked him how he planned to pay me back, he just shrugged again, saying he'd figure it out eventually. When I demanded a timeline or a repayment plan, he called me uptight and accused me of not supporting his dreams. "You're always so rigid," he said. "Maybe you should take a vacation and chill out." I stormed out of the cafe, shaking with anger. When I got home, I told my parents I was done. Either Mark repays the money, or I'll take legal action. My dad's face turned red, and my mom started crying. You can't do that to your own brother, she sobbed. Watch me, I replied. That's when they dropped a bombshell. They'd co-signed for a loan to cover part of Mark's trip, which he'd already defaulted on. If I pressed charges, it might ruin their finances too. You'll destroy this family, my dad said gravely. Now I'm stuck. If I go through with pressing charges, I risk alienating my parents and causing them financial hardship. But if I let it go, I'll lose not just my wedding fund but any respect I have left for them. A week later, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door, but curiosity got the better of me. He waltzed in like nothing had happened, plopping onto my couch and helping himself to a soda from the fridge. Listen, he began, like he was doing me a favor. I've been thinking about this whole wedding fund thing, and I've got a solution. I crossed my arms, waiting for whatever nonsense he was about to spout. I can't pay you back all at once, he admitted. But I can give you $500 a month. How does that sound? I laughed bitterly. At that rate, it'll take you over 4 years to pay me back. Exactly, he said, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. That's fair, right? You've got time before the wedding anyway. The arrogance in his tone pushed me over the edge. Mark, do you even understand what you've done? You stole from me. You stole from your own sister. And now you're acting like I should be grateful for your half-assed offer to pay me back on your terms. His expression darkened. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be, he snapped. It's just money. You and David will figure it out. You always do. That was it. I told him to get out and never come back unless he was ready to return every cent. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and I collapsed onto the couch, shaking with anger. The fallout was immediate. Mark must have gone straight to my parents, because within hours, my mom was calling, her voice trembling with rage. How could you speak to your brother like that? She demanded. He's trying to make things right, and you're shutting him down. You're tearing this family apart. I'm tearing the family apart? I shot back. Mark stole from me, and you're defending him. How is that okay? He's your brother, she said, as if that explained everything. He made a mistake, but he's willing to fix it. You need to let this go. I hung up on her. Over the next few days, the family group chat exploded. My parents, aunts, and uncles all weighed in, most of them siding with Mark. It's just money, one uncle said. Family is more important. Another relative chimed in, saying I was being dramatic and should forgive him. The only person who seemed to have my back was my cousin Lisa. She texted me privately, "You're not crazy. What Mark did is unforgivable, and everyone else is just enabling him. Do what you need to do." Lisa's message gave me the push I needed to look into legal action. I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. She explained that since the money was taken from a joint account, it could be considered theft, but the case might be complicated by the family dynamics and lack of clear boundaries about who could access the account. Even if it's messy, you have a strong case, she said. But you need to be prepared for backlash. Backlash was an understatement. When my parents found out I was consulting a lawyer, they lost it. My mom came to my apartment in tears, begging me to reconsider. Think about what this will do to Mark, she cried. He could get a criminal record. His future will be ruined. What about my future? I shot back. What about my wedding? Why is Mark's happiness more important than mine? She had no answer for that. While all this was happening, David stayed supportive, but I could tell the situation was weighing on him too. One night, he sat me down and said, "We need to talk about what this is doing to us." "What do you mean?" I asked, panicked. "I mean, I don't want this to overshadow our wedding or our relationship," he said gently. "I hate what your family is putting you through, but I also hate seeing you so consumed by this. Maybe it's time to make a decision and move forward, whatever that looks like." He was right. I couldn't let Mark and my parents have this much control over my life. But what did moving forward mean? Letting it go felt like giving up, but pressing charges felt like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Lisa called me with some shocking news. She'd been talking to Mark's ex-girlfriend and found out that Mark had done something similar before. Apparently, a few years ago, he borrowed $10,000 from the ex under the guise of starting a business. He never paid her back, and when she tried to confront him, he ghosted her. Hearing this solidified my decision. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. Mark had been manipulating people and avoiding consequences for years, and my parents had been enabling him every step of the way. I was furious when I learned about Mark's past behavior. This wasn't just about the wedding fund anymore, it was about a pattern of entitlement and manipulation that no one in my family seemed willing to confront. Lisa and I dug deeper, talking to a few of Mark's old friends. The stories we uncovered painted a picture of someone who had been using people his entire adult life. One friend, Eric, told us Mark had borrowed money to invest in stocks but ended up spending it on concert tickets. Another mentioned a pyramid scheme Mark had pushed, convincing people to buy into his business opportunity only for them to lose their money. I compiled everything, statements from his ex, screenshots of his schemes, and proof of his lies. My lawyer was impressed. "This is more than just your case now," she said. "If you pursue this, it could expose a lot more than the stolen wedding fund." Before filing charges, I decided to give my parents one last chance to make things right. I called them to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe far away from my apartment. They showed up together, their expressions a mix of hope and exhaustion. "Are you ready to put this behind us?" my mom asked the moment she sat down. "No," I said bluntly, sliding a folder across the table. "I need you to see what Mark has done." The folder contained everything Lisa and I had uncovered: his scams, his lies, and his history of stealing from people who trusted him. My dad flipped through the pages in stunned silence, but my mom barely looked. She pushed it back toward me and said, "This isn't necessary." "Not necessary?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This proves Mark has been lying to everyone for years, including you. He's your brother," she said, as if that excused everything. "He's made mistakes, but he's still family." "I'm family too," I snapped. "But you've chosen to protect him at my expense. You're enabling him to keep hurting people. How can you not see that?" My dad finally spoke up. "What do you want us to do?" he asked quietly. "I want you to hold him accountable," I said. "Tell him to pay me back. Stop defending him. Stop pretending this is okay." They exchanged a look, and for a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to them. But then my mom shook her head. "We can't turn our backs on Mark. He needs us. And I don't?" I asked, standing up. "I guess I have my answer." When my parents told Mark about our meeting, he lost it. He sent me a series of texts that ranged from angry to desperate. "You're ruining my life," one read. "Why are you doing this?" "It's just money," another said. Then, a few hours later, he sent, "Fine. You win. I'll pay you back, but it'll take time." I didn't respond. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and told her to proceed. Once the legal process started, things escalated quickly. Mark was served with a notice to appear in court, and my parents were livid. My mom called me sobbing, saying I was destroying the family and driving a wedge between everyone. "You're making things worse," she cried. "If this goes public, it'll ruin us." "It'll ruin Mark," I corrected. "And maybe it should?" Word spread through the family, and the reactions were mixed. My Uncle Rob called to say he supported me, admitting he'd lent Mark money years ago and never saw a dime of it back. My Aunt Carol, on the other hand, accused me of being vindictive and petty. The group chat became a war zone. Some relatives sided with me, others with Mark, and a few tried to play peacemaker. But the damage was done. Family gatherings were cancelled, and my parents stopped speaking to me entirely. The day of Mark's court appearance was surreal. I didn't want to go, but my lawyer encouraged me to be there. Mark looked disheveled, a far cry from the carefree guy who had bragged about his Bali trip. The judge didn't hold back. After reviewing the evidence, they ruled in my favor, ordering Mark to repay the full $25,000 with interest. The judge also made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, calling it a gross misuse of trust and family resources. Mark didn't say a word to me as he left the courtroom. Mark's financial situation spiraled after the ruling. He couldn't repay the money, so his wages were garnished. He ended up selling his car and moving back in with my parents, who blamed me for ruining his life. Meanwhile, I started to rebuild. David and I downsized our wedding plans but made it a beautiful day surrounded by people who truly cared about us. Lisa was my maid of honor, and Mrs. Chan from my bakery job surprised me with a custom cake as her gift. My parents didn't come. Neither did Mark. The weeks after the wedding were bittersweet. David and I were finally married, but the absence of my parents and Mark loomed over the day like a shadow. I tried not to let it get to me, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. After the court ruling, my parents went no contact with me. They refused to acknowledge what Mark had done or the irreparable damage it had caused. My mom sent one final text before blocking me. "You got what you wanted. I hope you're happy now." Mark, on the other hand, wasn't so quiet. Even after losing in court, he continued to spread lies about me to the family, claiming I'd blindsided him and that I only cared about money. He conveniently left out the part where he'd stolen the wedding fund in the first place. It wasn't long before Mark found a way to land himself in more trouble. Lisa, my cousin, called me one evening with news that left me shaking my head in disbelief. "You won't believe this," she said. "Mark's trying to start a GoFundMe." "What?" I asked, incredulous. She sent me the link, and sure enough, there it was, a GoFundMe titled "Help Me Rebuild After Family Betrayal." In the description, Mark painted himself as a victim of my unforgiving and vindictive actions. He claimed he was struggling to pay off unfair court-ordered debts and needed help getting back on his feet. The audacity was almost impressive. What shocked me even more was that a few distant relatives and family friends had actually donated. Lisa wasn't having it. She reported the GoFundMe for fraud, and within days, the platform removed it. Still, the fact that Mark even tried such a blatant scheme solidified what I already knew: he would never change. While Mark continued to spiral, I started focusing on building a new life. David and I moved to a new city, and I landed a better-paying job that allowed us to replenish our savings faster than expected. We even started talking about buying our first home. Meanwhile, I leaned heavily on the people who had supported me throughout the ordeal. Lisa became one of my closest confidants, and David's family welcomed me with open arms, offering a warmth and stability I hadn't felt from my own family in years. Therapy also became a lifeline. My therapist helped me process the betrayal and guilt that came with cutting ties with my family. She reminded me that setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person, it means I value myself enough to protect my peace. Months later, I got a surprise I never saw coming: a letter from my dad. It arrived in a plain envelope, the handwriting instantly recognizable. In the letter, he admitted that he and my mom had handled things poorly. He didn't go so far as to apologize for enabling Mark, but he did acknowledge that I'd been wronged and that he regretted how things had turned out. He ended the letter by saying he missed me and hoped we could talk someday. I stared at the letter for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine, that maybe my dad was finally starting to see the truth. But another part of me couldn't forget how easily he had dismissed my pain to protect Mark. For now, I decided not to respond. I needed more time to figure out if rebuilding a relationship with him was even possible, or if it was worth the risk. While my dad's letter gave me pause, Mark's behavior only reinforced my decision to stay distant. Over the next few months, I heard through the grapevine that his situation had gone from bad to worse. He'd been evicted from my parents' house after racking up debt in their name. He tried couchsurfing with friends, but his reputation as a freeloader caught up with him. By the end of the year, he was essentially homeless, bouncing between cheap motels and begging for help online. I didn't feel sorry for him. He'd made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. As for me, life kept moving forward. David and I eventually bought our first home, a cozy little place with a garden that I've fallen in love with. We've started talking about starting a family, and for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about the future. The scars from what happened with my family are still there, but they've started to fade. I've learned to focus on the people who truly care about me and to let go of those who don't. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born into, it's who shows up for you when it matters most. My brother and parents may never fully understand the damage they caused, but I found peace in knowing I stood up for myself. Mark can keep blaming everyone else for his problems. My parents can keep making excuses. But I'm done carrying the weight of their choices. I'm finally free to live my life on my own terms, and that, to me, is worth everything.